I went to surprise my son at the hospital where he worked, the same hospital I'd donated millions to help rebuild. As I reached his office, I heard his voice through the door. "Once he signs the transfer papers, pull the plug. The old man won't feel a thing." A woman's voice replied, "And the inheritance?" He laughed softly. "Split it after the funeral. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought I'd be standing outside my son's office door, questioning everything I believed about the person I raised. At 61, I figured I'd seen enough of life's surprises. I was wrong. It was a Thursday morning in late October when I decided to surprise Leonard at work. The crisp autumn air reminded me of the day we'd broken ground on the new pediatric wing 3 years ago. I'd donated $2.7 million to help rebuild this hospital after the fire, partly because Leonard worked here, partly because my late wife Margaret would have wanted it. She always said helping sick children was the most important thing we could do. Walking through those gleaming hallways I'd helped fund should have filled me with pride. Instead, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the receptionist avoided eye contact when I mentioned Leonard's name, or how quickly she buzzed me through without the usual pleasantries. I brushed it off. People are busy in hospitals. Leonard's office was on the 4th floor in the administrative wing. As chief of internal medicine, he had a corner office with windows overlooking the memorial garden we'd dedicated to Margaret. I'd been so proud when he got that promotion last year. My son, following in his grandfather's footsteps, healing people, making a difference. I was almost at his door when I heard voices inside. Leonard's voice, unmistakable, but speaking in a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, calculating. "Once he signs the transfer papers, pull the plug. The old man won't feel a thing." My blood turned to ice. I pressed closer to the door, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. A woman's voice responded, sweet but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "And the inheritance?" Leonard laughed. It was a sound I'd never heard from my son before, soft and cruel. "Split it after the funeral. Sarah, baby, will finally be able to pay off those credit cards and get that house in Tuscany you've been wanting." I stumbled backward, my vision blurring. The hallway suddenly felt too bright, too sterile. A nurse walked past, giving me a concerned look, but I couldn't form words. My legs felt like they might give out. They were talking about killing someone. Someone old, someone with money. My first instinct was to burst through that door and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Maybe it was the professional way they discussed it, like they were planning a medical procedure. Maybe it was the casual mention of inheritance money, or maybe it was the terrible growing certainty that I knew exactly who they were talking about. I walked to the elevator on unsteady legs, my mind racing. Leonard had been asking a lot of questions lately about my will, my health, my plans for the future. He'd insisted I get that comprehensive physical last month, even though I felt fine. He'd suggested I might want to consider giving him power of attorney just in case something happened. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, staring at my reflection in the polished steel. At 61, I looked older than I felt. My hair had gone completely gray after Margaret died 5 years ago, and the stress of managing our various business interests had added lines around my eyes. But I was healthy. My doctor had said so just last week. So why was my son talking about pulling plugs? I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Our house sat on 12 acres just outside the city, the same house where Leonard had grown up, where Margaret had tended her rose garden, where we'd hosted countless dinner parties and family gatherings. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I sat in my study, staring at the framed photos on my desk. Leonard, at his medical school graduation, beaming as I pinned his white coat. Leonard and Sarah on their wedding day, looking so happy and in love. Leonard holding our first grandchild, little Emma, with such tenderness in his eyes. Who was the man I'd heard in that office? My phone rang, making me jump. Leonard's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, hey, I heard you stopped by the hospital today. Sorry I missed you." His voice sounded normal, warm, like the son I'd always known. "Oh, yes, I was in the neighborhood." I tried to keep my voice steady. Thought I'd see how you were doing. That's so sweet of you. Listen, I've been thinking about what we discussed last week, about getting your affairs in order. I really think we should schedule a meeting with the lawyers soon. Just to make sure everything's set up properly. There it was again. The push to handle my affairs. The urgency that I'd attributed to his caring nature. Sure, son, we can talk about it. Great. Actually, why don't you come to dinner Sunday? Sarah's making that pot roast you love. We can discuss it then. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my study, not bothering to turn on the lights. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and I could hear the old house settling around me. This place held so many memories, so much love. Had I been blind to something all these years? I thought about Margaret's final days, how Leonard had been so attentive, so involved in her care. He'd handled all the medical decisions when I was too grief-stricken to think clearly. The doctors had said there was nothing more they could do, that it was time to let her go peacefully. Had that been true? The thought hit me like a physical blow. I doubled over in my chair, gasping for air. Surely not. Surely Leonard wouldn't have. But the doubt was there now, planted and growing like a poisonous seed. I needed to know the truth, not just about what I'd overheard today, but about everything. About Margaret's death, about Leonard's sudden financial interest in my affairs, about the strange looks I'd been getting from hospital staff. Sunday dinner was 3 days away. 3 days to figure out if my only son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd been so proud of, was planning to kill me. The weekend passed in a fog of disbelief and growing dread. I found myself jumping at every phone call, analyzing every conversation I'd had with Leonard over the past few months, searching for clues I'd missed. By Sunday morning, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. I was going to investigate my own son. I arrived at Leonard and Sarah's house precisely at noon, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the same smile I'd perfected over decades of business dealings. Their home was beautiful. A colonial-style house in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. I'd helped them with the down payment, of course. Now I wondered if that generosity had been the first step in some long-term plan. "Roger," Sarah greeted me with her usual enthusiasm, throwing her arms around me in a hug that felt different now. Everything felt different. She was a petite woman with auburn hair and green eyes that had always seemed warm. Today I noticed how her smile didn't quite reach those eyes. "The house smells wonderful," I said, following her into the living room where Leonard was watching football. "Dad, perfect timing. Come sit with me." Leonard patted the couch beside him. "Sarah's been in the kitchen all morning making your favorite meal." I studied his face as we talked about safe topics. The weather, the football game, the kids. Leonard looked exactly like he always had. Tall and lean like me, with Margaret's dark eyes and gentle demeanor. There was nothing sinister in his expression, nothing that suggested he was capable of what I'd overheard. During dinner, the conversation turned to what I'd been dreading. "Dad, I've been thinking more about what we discussed," Leonard said, cutting his pot roast with surgical precision, "about getting your estate planning updated. With your net worth being what it is, we really need to make sure everything's protected." "My net worth?" He said it so casually, like he'd memorized the number. "What exactly are you concerned about?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Sarah leaned forward, her voice filled with what seemed like genuine concern. "Roger, we just worry about you being all alone in that big house. What if something happened? What if you had a fall or a heart attack? We want to make sure you're protected." "I'm 61, not 91, I replied with a chuckle. "I think I've got a few good years left." Leonard's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Of course you do. But Dad, statistics show that men your age, especially after losing a spouse, are at higher risk for all sorts of health issues. Depression, heart problems, even early onset dementia." The way he said dementia made my blood run cold. "Has your doctor mentioned any concerns?" Sarah asked, tilting her head with practiced sympathy. "No, my last physical was clean across the board." "Well, sometimes these things can develop quickly," Leonard said. "That's why it's so important to have safeguards in place. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, that sort of thing. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his advice. You know what? You're absolutely right. Why don't you set up a meeting with your lawyer? I trust your judgment. The relief that crossed both their faces was unmistakable. They exchanged a quick glance that might have seemed innocent to anyone else, but sent a chill down my spine. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took a detour past Leonard's home office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see stacks of papers on his desk, medical journals, billing statements, and something that made me pause, a life insurance document with my name on it. I didn't have time to read it properly, but I saw enough to know that Leonard had been researching life insurance policies in my name, large ones. Driving home that night, I made another decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. I was going to hire a private investigator. Monday morning, I called an old business associate who dealt with some corporate security issues years back. He recommended a woman named Patricia Morse, a former police detective who specialized in what she diplomatically called family matters. Patricia was about 50, with short silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. We met at a coffee shop downtown, away from anywhere I might run into Leonard or Sarah. I need to know what my son has been doing, I told her, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Specifically, I need to know about his financial situation, his medical practice, and... I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. I need to know if he's been involved in any suspicious patient deaths. Patricia didn't even blink. How much do you know about his current situation? Almost nothing, apparently. I thought he was doing well. Successful practice, nice house, 2 kids. But something I overheard suggests otherwise. She asked me to tell her everything, from the conversation I'd overheard to the dinner conversation about my estate planning. She took notes in a small leather notebook, her expression remaining professionally neutral. I'll need access to some records, she said finally. Hospital records, financial documents, that sort of thing. I have contacts who can help with that, but it'll take time. How much time? Give me a week for the preliminary investigation, 2 weeks for a complete picture. 2 weeks felt like an eternity, but I agreed. Patricia handed me her card and a small device that looked like a pen. Digital recorder, she explained. If you have any more conversations like the one you overheard, record them. But be careful. If your suspicions are correct, you could be in real danger. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Real danger. From my own son. That evening, I sat in Margaret's old sitting room, surrounded by her books and photographs. I'd kept everything exactly as she'd left it, down to the reading glasses on her bedside table. Now I found myself wondering about her final weeks, replaying every conversation, every medical decision. Leonard had been so helpful during her illness. He'd explained every treatment option, every medication change, every decision to increase or decrease her morphine. When the doctors said it was time to consider palliative care, Leonard had been the one to help me understand that we were prolonging her suffering. But what if we weren't? What if those doctors were wrong? What if Leonard had influences their recommendations? I picked up the framed photo from Margaret's nightstand, the one of the 3 of us on vacation in Maine the summer before she got sick. We looked so happy, so complete. Leonard had his arm around both of us, and his smile was genuine and full of love. When had that changed? When had my son stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle? My phone buzzed with a text message from Leonard. Thanks for dinner yesterday, Dad. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow to set up that meeting. Love you. I stared at those last 2 words until they blurred together. Love you. Did he mean it? Had he ever meant it? Or was love just another tool in whatever game he was playing? I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, but I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Somewhere in this city, my son was planning something that involved transfer papers and pulling plugs and splitting inheritance money, and I was running out of time to figure out how to stop him. Patricia called me on a Wednesday morning exactly 1 week after our coffee shop meeting. Her voice was tense in a way that made my stomach clench before she even spoke. We need to meet, today. And Roger, You're going to want to sit down for this conversation." We arranged to meet at her office, a modest space above a bookstore downtown. When I arrived, Patricia had files spread across her desk, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that formed a picture I didn't want to see. "Your son is in serious financial trouble," she began without preamble. "Credit card debt totaling over $150,000, a second mortgage on his house that he took out 6 months ago, and gambling debts that my sources estimated around $300,000. I sank into the chair across from her desk. Gambling. High-stakes poker games mostly, underground circuits that don't mess around when it comes to collection. Leonard owes money to some very dangerous people. She slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Leonard leaving what looked like a warehouse, his face tense and worried. "This was taken last Thursday night. He's been frequenting this place for over a year. But his salary at the hospital, $200,000 a year. Good money, but not nearly enough to cover his lifestyle and his debts, especially not with Sarah's spending habits." Patricia opened another file. "She's racked up another $75,000 in credit card debt. Designer clothes, jewelry, spa treatments. She's living like someone with unlimited funds." My head was spinning. How did I not know any of this? Because they've been very careful to maintain appearances. But Roger, the financial problems are just the beginning. The real issue is what Leonard's been doing at the hospital. She pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Patient Records, Confidential. "I have a contact in the medical examiner's office. Over the past 18 months, there have been 5 deaths at your son's hospital that raised questions. All elderly patients, all wealthy, all under Leonard's direct care." My mouth went dry. What kind of questions? The kind where families expected their loved ones to recover, but they died suddenly from what appeared to be complications. The kind where the medical records show one thing, but the actual treatment was something else entirely. She opened the folder and spread out copies of death certificates and medical records. Names I didn't recognize, but faces that looked familiar from the society pages of the local newspaper. Wealthy retirees who'd been active in the community. Harold Brennan, age 73, admitted for routine heart surgery, died from what was listed as surgical complications. But look at this. She pointed to a notation in the medical file. His daughter specifically requested that Leonard not be involved in his care, but somehow Leonard ended up being the attending physician anyway. She moved to another file. Eleanor Walsh, age 68, cancer patient who was responding well to treatment. Her oncologist was optimistic about her prognosis. She died 3 days after Leonard began consulting on her case. My hands were shaking as I looked at the documents. "Are you saying he murdered these people?" "I'm saying there's a pattern, and in each case, Leonard was named as a beneficiary in the victim's will, or there was some financial arrangement that benefited him after their death." She pulled out another document that made my blood freeze. It was a copy of a will amendment signed just 2 weeks ago, my will, amended to name Leonard as the sole beneficiary of my $8.2 million estate. "When did you sign this?" Patricia asked gently. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked like my handwriting, but I had no memory of signing any such document. "I didn't sign this." "I was afraid you'd say that." She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "This is security footage from the law office, where this will was supposedly signed and witnessed." The video showed me sitting in a chair, apparently unconscious or heavily sedated, while someone guided my hand to sign the document. The person helping me sign was mostly out of frame, but I could see enough to recognize the watch on his wrist. The same watch I'd given Leonard for his birthday last year. "He forged my signature," I whispered. "More than that. Based on what I can see in this footage, you were drugged, probably with something that would leave you with no memory of the incident." I felt sick. "When was this taken?" 3 weeks ago. The same day you went to the hospital for that physical Leonard insisted you get." The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The physical had been a pretext to get me to the medical building. Leonard must have slipped me something during lunch afterward, then taken me to sign the will while I was incapacitated. "But that's not the worst part." Patricia continued. "Show me your arms." I rolled up my sleeves, confused. She examined my forearms with a magnifying glass, then pointed to a tiny mark near my elbow. "Injection site. Probably from a very small needle." "Roger, I think Leonard has been giving you something. Small doses of medication that would cause confusion, memory problems, and eventually more serious symptoms." "What kind of medication?" "Based on your description of feeling foggy and forgetful lately, probably a combination of benzodiazepines and possibly some kind of neurotoxin. Nothing that would show up in a standard blood test, unless someone knew specifically what to look for." I thought about the dizzy spells I'd been having, the moments of confusion that I'd attributed to stress and grief, the way I'd felt unusually tired after every visit with Leonard and Sarah. "He's been poisoning me." Slowly and carefully, creating symptoms that would support a diagnosis of early dementia or some other cognitive decline. That would explain why he keeps pushing for power of attorney and medical decision-making authority. Patricia pulled out one final document that made my heart stop completely. It was a medical file with my name on it from Leonard's hospital. According to the records, I'd been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease and was showing signs of significant cognitive decline. I'd never been diagnosed with any such thing. "This is a fabricated medical file," Patricia explained. "Leonard has been creating a paper trail that shows you're mentally incompetent. Once he gets power of attorney, he can have you committed to a long-term care facility, then gradually increase your medication until—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Based on the pattern with his other victims, probably not long. Maybe days, maybe a week or two at most. The fact that he's already changed your will suggests he's getting ready to move to the final stage." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Leonard's betrayal. This wasn't just about money. This was about my life, about everything Margaret and I had built together, about the legacy we'd wanted to leave. "What can we do?" Patricia leaned forward. "We need evidence. Real evidence that will hold up in court. Right now, everything I've shown you is circumstantial. We need Leonard to incriminate himself." "How?" "You're going to have to play along with his plan. Let him think he's succeeding, but you'll be wearing a wire and we'll be documenting everything." The thought of pretending to go along with my son's plan to kill me was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way to stop him. "There's something else you need to know," Patricia said, her voice growing even more serious. "Sarah isn't just a willing participant in this. She's the one who taught Leonard how to do it." She pulled out another file, this one labeled Sarah Mitchell, Prior History. "Before she married your son, Sarah worked as a nurse in a facility in Florida that had an unusually high number of elderly patient deaths. She was never officially charged with anything, but she left that job very suddenly after an investigation began." The room was spinning. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, who'd called me dad for the past 8 years, who'd brought my grandchildren into the world, was a killer. "She's done this before," I said, "multiple times, and now she's trained your son to do the same thing." I thought about little Emma and James, Leonard and Sarah's children, my grandchildren. What kind of people were raising them? What kind of legacy would they inherit? "We have to stop them," I said. Patricia nodded. "We will. But Roger, you need to understand what you're up against. These aren't people who are going to just confess and walk away. If they suspect you know what they're planning, they'll accelerate their timeline." I looked out the window at the busy street below, watching normal people going about their normal lives. None of them knew that their trusted doctor and his nurse wife were methodically murdering elderly patients for money. "When do we start?" "Tonight. Leonard called you earlier, didn't he? About dinner plans?" I checked my phone. There was indeed a message from Leonard asking if I wanted to come over for dinner tomorrow night to discuss the power of attorney documents. "Perfect," Patricia said. "That's when we'll get the confession we need." As I left her office, I realized that in less than 24 hours I would be sitting across the dinner table from my son, knowing that he was planning to kill me and pretending that everything was normal. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a cold, calculating anger that reminded me of the businessman I used to be before retirement. Leonard had made one crucial mistake in his plan. He'd underestimated his father. I spent Thursday morning in what might have been the strangest business meeting of my life. Patricia had brought in a technology specialist, a young man named David, who looked like he could be one of my grandchildren, but spoke with the authority of someone who'd done this many times before. "The recording device goes here," he said, showing me a nearly invisible wire that would run along my collar. "And this backup recorder goes in your jacket pocket. We'll also have a van parked outside Leonard's house with additional monitoring equipment." Patricia spread blueprints of Leonard and Sarah's house across the table. "We need to get them talking about the specifics of their plan, not just vague references to inheritance money, but details about how they intend to kill you and when." I practiced wearing the equipment until it felt natural, until I could move and speak normally without thinking about the wires. We rehearsed different conversation scenarios, with Patricia playing Sarah and David playing Leonard. It was surreal, practicing how to get my own son to confess to planning my murder. "Remember," Patricia emphasized, "you need to seem vulnerable but not suspicious. Act like you're starting to have those cognitive problems Leonard's been claiming you have. Be confused about recent events, maybe forget something important, make them think their drug regimen is working." At 5 o'clock, I drove to Leonard's house with recording equipment hidden on my body and a stomach full of dread. But underneath the fear was something else. A growing determination to protect not just myself, but future victims. If Patricia was right about Sarah's history and Leonard's pattern, I wouldn't be the last. Sarah greeted me at the door with her usual hug and smile. "Roger, you look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "Oh, I said, deliberately letting my voice trail off. "Some days are better than others. I've been having trouble sleeping lately." I saw her exchange a quick glance with Leonard, who appeared from the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel. "That's actually something we wanted to talk to you about tonight, Dad. We're worried about some of the things you've been saying and doing lately." We settled in the living room with drinks. I made sure to mention that I'd been having trouble remembering where I'd put things, that I'd gotten confused about what day it was earlier in the week. With each symptom I described, I watched their faces light up with satisfaction. "Dad, that's exactly why we think it's so important to get these legal documents in order," Leonard said, leaning forward with feigned concern. "What if your condition gets worse? What if you can't make decisions for yourself?" "What condition?" I asked, playing confused. Dr. Matthews said my physical was fine. Sarah and Leonard exchanged another look. "Dad," Leonard said gently, "we've run some additional tests, some cognitive assessments. The results are concerning." "What kind of tests?" "I don't remember taking any tests." "That's part of the problem," Sarah said softly. "The memory issues are getting worse. We had Dr. Phillips do an evaluation last week when you came to the hospital." Dr. Phillips. I knew that name from Patricia's research. He was the neurologist who'd signed off on several of the suspicious diagnoses in the other cases. "What did he say?" I asked, letting my voice shake slightly. Leonard pulled out a folder that I recognized as the fake medical file Patricia had shown me. "Dad, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but you're showing early signs of Alzheimer's disease." I stared at the folder, letting my face crumple with fear and confusion. "Alzheimer's? But I feel fine most of the time." "That's how it starts," Sarah said, moving closer and taking my hand. "The good news is that we caught it early. There are treatments that can slow the progression." "What kind of treatments?" "Medication mostly, and we need to make sure you're in a safe environment where you can get the care you need." Here it was. The setup for moving me into a facility where they could control my medical care completely. "I don't want to leave my house," I said. "Margaret's things are there, all our memories." "We understand," Leonard said. "But Dad, what if you forget to take your medication? What if you have a fall and no one's there to help you? What if you get confused and wander outside?" They painted a picture of helplessness and danger that would have been convincing if I didn't know what they were really planning. I let them talk, asking fearful questions and expressing confusion about legal documents I pretended not to understand. The power of attorney is just a precaution, Sarah explained. It means that if you become unable to make decisions, Leonard can make them for you. Medical decisions, financial decisions, all in your best interest. And the will? I asked. Just updating it to make sure everything goes to family, Leonard said. You know how much legal fees can eat into an estate if things aren't properly organized. I nodded slowly as if trying to process information that was too complex for my declining mind. I trust you, son. You're a doctor. You know what's best. The relief on their faces was unmistakable. Sarah actually smiled. We'll take such good care of you, Roger, she said. You won't have to worry about anything. During dinner, they talked about their plans for my care. A private facility that specialized in Alzheimer's patients. A room with a nice view where I'd be comfortable. Medical staff who were experienced in managing the progression of the disease. How long do people usually live with Alzheimer's? I asked innocently. It varies, Leonard said. Some people live for years, but others, especially when they have other health complications. What kind of complications? Heart problems, respiratory issues, sometimes patients stop eating properly or develop infections. The immune system becomes compromised. He was describing exactly how he planned to kill me, and I was recording every word. After dinner, they brought out the legal documents, pages and pages of dense legal language that would give Leonard complete control over my life and death. I should probably read through all this, I said, picking up the power of attorney document. Of course, Leonard said, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. Although, with your memory issues, you might find it easier if we just go through the important parts together. Sarah brought me a cup of tea while I pretended to read. The cup was warm and the tea smelled like chamomile, but I noticed a slight bitter aftertaste that I hadn't noticed before. They were drugging me again, right here at their dinner table. I pretended to drink the tea while actually just touching it to my lips. Within a few minutes, I began acting drowsy and confused, slurring my words slightly. I'm feeling a bit dizzy, I said. That's just the stress of dealing with all this paperwork, Sarah said soothingly. Why don't we get these documents signed so you can rest? They guided my hand as I signed paper after paper, just like in the security footage Patricia had shown me. But this time, I was fully conscious and recording everything. There, Leonard said as I signed the last document. Now you don't have to worry about any of this anymore. We'll take care of everything. When do I need to move to the facility? I asked. Soon, Sarah said. We're thinking next week, just to be safe. And my medication? We'll adjust it as needed, Leonard said. The important thing is keeping you comfortable. Comfortable. That was his euphemism for the gradual poisoning that would eventually kill me. As they walked me to my car, Leonard put his arm around my shoulders. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to take fishing, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when Margaret died, the young man who'd made me so proud when he became a doctor. I love you, Dad, he said. I'm going to take such good care of you. The words might have broken my heart if I hadn't heard the conversation in his office, if I didn't know about the other victims, if I hadn't seen the fake medical files. I love you too, son, I replied, and meant it. I did love him. That's what made this betrayal so devastating. I drove home slowly, my hands shaking, not from whatever drug they'd tried to give me, but from the emotional weight of what I'd just experienced. In my jacket pocket, the recording device held evidence of their entire plan. But as I pulled into my driveway, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. They'd mentioned moving me to the facility next week. That meant they were planning to kill me within days of getting me there. Patricia had been right. I was running out of time. I called her from my study, using the secure phone number she'd given me. We got it all, I told her, every detail of their plan. Good. Meet me tomorrow morning. We'll take this to the authorities and get them arrested before they can hurt you or anyone else. But as I hung up the phone, I looked around at Margaret's sitting room, at the life we'd built together, at the legacy we'd planned to leave behind. Leonard and Sarah had stolen 5 years of my life since Margaret's death, slowly poisoning me and manipulating me while planning my murder. Justice through the legal system would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be enough. I had a different kind of justice in mind. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I sat in Patricia's office listening to the recordings from the night before. The sound of my son's voice calmly discussing my murder was even more chilling in the harsh light of day. "This is more than enough evidence for arrests," Patricia said, ejecting the recording device from her computer. "I can have the police here within the hour." "Not yet," I said quietly. She looked at me with surprise. "Roger, they're planning to move you to that facility within days. Once you're there, under their complete medical control. I understand the timeline, but I want to do something first." I'd spent the sleepless night formulating a plan that was risky, but necessary. Leonard and Sarah had spent months setting up their elaborate scheme, creating false medical records, forging legal documents, slowly poisoning me while pretending to care. A simple arrest felt insufficient. "I want them to experience what they put their victims through," I explained. "The fear, the helplessness, the realization that someone they trusted is planning to destroy them." Patricia frowned. "What exactly are you proposing?" "They think I'm signing myself into that facility today. Leonard called this morning to confirm the appointment at 2 o'clock. I'm going to keep that appointment, but not as the confused, helpless victim they're expecting." I opened my briefcase and pulled out documents I'd prepared with my real lawyer, the one Leonard didn't know about. These are the actual legal documents. A new will that leaves everything to charity, with specific provisions that Leonard and Sarah receive nothing if they're ever convicted of a crime. Power of attorney granted to my lawyer, not Leonard. And most importantly, a detailed confession about everything they've done, including evidence about their other victims. You want to confront them directly. More than that, I want them to understand that their victims weren't as helpless as they thought. I want them to know that someone fought back. Patricia studied the documents, then looked at me with something approaching admiration. "You realize this is dangerous. If they panic, if they realize you know everything, they won't panic. They're too confident, too sure of themselves. They think they've been so clever, so careful, they won't expect their elderly victim to outsmart them." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" "Backup. I want you and the police standing by, ready to move in if something goes wrong. But I want to do this my way first." At 1:30, I arrived at Sunset Manor, the private facility where Leonard and Sarah planned to have me killed. It was exactly as they'd described: beautiful grounds, expensive furnishings, and the kind of discreet atmosphere that wealthy families paid for when they wanted their elderly relatives to disappear quietly. Leonard and Sarah were waiting in the admission office with a woman who introduced herself as the facility director. They all wore the same expressions of professional sympathy, like they were helping me through a difficult but necessary transition. "Dad, you're right on time," Leonard said, standing to embrace me. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, actually," I replied, my voice stronger than it had been the night before. "Much clearer." I saw Leonard and Sarah exchange a quick glance of concern. They weren't expecting clarity. "That's wonderful," the director said. "Sometimes people have good days and bad days with cognitive decline. The important thing is that you're here where we can take proper care of you." "About that," I said, settling into my chair. "I've been thinking about this arrangement and I have some questions." Leonard leaned forward. "Of course, Dad. What would you like to know?" "I'd like to know why you've been putting drugs in my food." The room went completely silent. The director looked confused, but Leonard and Sarah's faces went pale. "Dad, I think you're having one of your confused episodes," Sarah said carefully. "No one's been putting anything in your food." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small vial of liquid. "This is a sample of the tea you gave me last night. I had it analyzed this morning. Lorazepam and something called scopolamine, drugs that cause confusion, memory loss, and compliance." Leonard's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. You must have..." Must have what? Made it up? Like I made up the conversation I overheard in your office about pulling plugs and splitting inheritance money? The director was looking between us with growing alarm. I think perhaps we should postpone this admission until— No, I said firmly. I think we should continue. I think Leonard and Sarah should explain to this nice woman exactly what kind of medical care they were planning to provide me here. Sarah tried to maintain her composure. Roger, you're clearly having a paranoid episode. This is exactly why you need professional care. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the night before. Leonard's voice filled the room, calmly, discussing my fake Alzheimer's diagnosis and the treatments that would keep me comfortable until I died. The director pushed back from the table. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. This facility does not participate in elder abuse? Murder? I finished for her. No, I don't imagine you do, but Leonard and Sarah weren't planning to tell you what they were really doing, were they? I stood up and faced my son and daughter-in-law directly. 5 people. That's how many elderly patients you've murdered in the past 18 months. Harold Brennan, Eleanor Walsh, Margaret Sinclair, James Morrison, and Catherine Price. All wealthy, all trusting, all helpless under your medical care. Leonard shot to his feet. You're delusional. The stress of your condition is making you paranoid. Am I paranoid about the forged will, the one where you drugged me and guided my hand to sign documents I never agreed to? I pulled out copies of the security footage. Or am I paranoid about Sarah's history in Florida, where she killed at least 3 patients before you met her? Sarah's facade finally cracked. You don't understand. Those people were suffering. We helped them find peace. By stealing their money? We helped them, and yes, we were compensated for our care. There's nothing wrong with that. I stared at this woman, who had called me Dad for 8 years, who had brought my grandchildren into the world, who had spent family dinners talking about their hopes and dreams while planning to murder me for money. The children, I said quietly. What about Emma and James? What kind of legacy are you leaving them? For the first time, Leonard looked genuinely shaken. The children don't know anything. This has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with them. You're their father, their role model. What do you think happens to them when you're arrested for multiple murders? The director had already left the room, probably calling security. I could hear sirens in the distance, which meant Patricia had decided not to wait for my signal. You can't prove any of this, Sarah said desperately. It's all circumstantial, the word of a confused old man against 2 respected medical professionals. I smiled for the first time in days. Actually, I can prove all of it. See, while you 2 were planning my murder, I was planning something else. I pulled out the final document from my briefcase. This is my real will, properly witnessed and filed yesterday. It leaves my entire estate to a foundation dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths in medical facilities, the Margaret Holloway Foundation for Medical Ethics. Leonard's face went white. You can't do that. The will you signed was signed under duress while I was drugged. Any first-year law student could get that overturned, but more importantly, this new will contains detailed descriptions of everything you've done, including evidence that will help convict you for the murders of all your victims. The sirens were getting closer. Through the window, I could see police cars pulling into the parking lot. There's something else you should know, I said as we heard footsteps in the hallway. I've been working with the FBI for the past week. They've been investigating suspicious deaths at your hospital, and they're very interested in your financial records, your gambling debts, and your medical practices. Patricia appeared in the doorway with 2 FBI agents and 3 local police officers. Leonard Holloway and Sarah Holloway, you're under arrest for the murders of Harold Brennan, Eleanor Walsh, James Morrison, Catherine Price, and the attempted murder of Roger Holloway. As they read Leonard and Sarah their rights, I watched my son's face crumple with the realization that his perfect plan had fallen apart. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to come to me when he was scared or hurt. "Dad," he said as they put the handcuffs on him, "I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far." I looked at him for a long moment, This man who had been my greatest pride and was now my greatest shame. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You meant for it to go exactly this far. The only thing you're sorry about is that you got caught. As they led him away, Sarah turned back to me one last time. You've ruined everything. Those children will grow up without parents because of you. No, I replied. They'll grow up without parents because of what you chose to do. But they'll grow up knowing the truth about who their parents really were. The facility director returned with the paramedics, insisting that I be checked for drug exposure. As they examined me, I watched through the window as Leonard and Sarah were put into separate police cars. Patricia sat beside me as the paramedics worked. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Free, I said finally. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. But even as I said it, I knew the hardest part was still to come. Leonard and Sarah were gone, but Emma and James were still out there, innocent children who would need someone to help them understand what had happened to their parents, someone who could help them build a different kind of legacy. 6 months later, I stood in the newly established Margaret Holloway Foundation offices, watching investigators review files that would help families across the country get justice for their murdered loved ones. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned, fueled by donations from families who'd lost elderly relatives under suspicious circumstances and by my own $8.2 million estate. The trials had been swift and decisive. Leonard received life in prison without possibility of parole for 5 counts of first-degree murder. Sarah received the same sentence for 4 murders, with her Florida victims finally getting justice after years of their family's questions going unanswered. The gambling ring that had pressured Leonard into his desperate schemes was dismantled by federal investigators, preventing other doctors from falling into the same trap. But the legal victories, satisfying as they were, weren't what brought me peace. What brought me peace was Emma. I was in my study at home, reading through the latest foundation reports, when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Margaret's sister Helen getting out of her sedan, followed by 2 small figures I hadn't seen since the arrests. Emma, now 9 years old, walked slowly toward the house, holding her 6-year-old brother James's hand. They'd been living with Helen since their parents' imprisonment, and this was their first visit to see me. Helen had asked me repeatedly if I was ready for this conversation, if I was prepared to help them understand what had happened. I'd been preparing for 6 months. Grandpa Roger? Emma's voice was smaller than I remembered as Helen led them into the study. James hung back, partially hiding behind his sister. Hello, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to their level. I'm so glad you came to see me. Emma studied my face with the serious expression she'd inherited from Leonard. Aunt Helen says Mommy and Daddy did bad things, that they hurt people. I took a deep breath. We'd rehearsed this conversation with child psychologists, family counselors, and Helen countless times. But now, facing these 2 innocent children whose world had been shattered by their parents' choices, all the prepared words seemed inadequate. Yes, I said simply. They did hurt people. They made very bad choices that hurt a lot of families. Did they hurt you too? James asked, speaking for the first time. They tried to, but I was able to stop them before they could hurt me or anyone else. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the gravity of someone far too young to be dealing with such adult concepts. Are we bad too? She asked finally. Because we're their children? This was the question that had kept me awake for months, the one that had driven me to establish not just the foundation for investigating medical murders, but also a trust fund for Emma and James that would ensure they had every opportunity to build better lives than their parents had chosen. No, sweetheart, you are not responsible for what your parents did. You are good children who deserve love and happiness and the chance to make your own choices about who you want to be. I showed them around the house, pointing out pictures of their grandmother Margaret, telling them stories about Leonard when he was their age. I wanted them to understand that their father hadn't always been the man who'd committed those terrible crimes, that there had been good in him once, even if he'd lost his way. Helen stayed for dinner, and we talked about practical things, school arrangements, therapy, sessions, the trust fund that would pay for their education and support them into adulthood. But mostly we just spent time together, letting Emma and James get comfortable with the idea that they still had family who loved them despite everything that had happened. As the evening grew late, Emma came and sat beside me on the couch where I'd been reading to James. "Grandpa Roger," she said quietly, "will you tell us about Grandma Margaret?" I set down the book and pulled out the photo album that I'd been looking through earlier. Page by page, I showed them pictures of the woman they'd been too young to really remember. Margaret in her garden, Margaret at charity events, Margaret holding them as babies. "She would have been so proud of how brave you're both being," I told them, "and she would have wanted you to know that no matter what your parents did, you're loved. You're wanted. You belong in this family." James fell asleep against my shoulder as I read, and Emma curled up beside me, her small hand holding mine. "Will we see you again?" she asked as Helen prepared to take them home. "As often as you want to," I promised. "You're my grandchildren. Nothing will ever change that." After they left, I sat alone in Margaret's sitting room, surrounded by her books and photographs. The house felt different now, not empty but peaceful. The fear that had dominated my life for months was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected: purpose. The Foundation had already helped expose 3 other cases of medical professionals murdering elderly patients for financial gain. Patricia had left her private investigation business to become the Foundation's director of investigations. Dr. Phillips, the neurologist who'd signed off on the fake diagnoses, had lost his license and was facing criminal charges for fraud. The gambling ring that had ensnared Leonard was under federal investigation, with several other doctors coming forward to admit they'd been pressured into insurance fraud, and worse. The ripple effects of our investigation were protecting vulnerable patients across multiple states. But beyond all of that, beyond the justice and the investigations and the legal victories, what mattered most was that Emma and James would grow up knowing the truth. They would understand that their parents had made terrible choices, but they would also know that they were not doomed to repeat those choices. They would have resources, support, and most importantly, they would have love. I picked up the phone and dialed Helen's number. "How are they doing?" I asked when she answered. "Emma asked me 3 times if you really meant it about seeing them again. James wants to know if you have any more books about trains." I smiled. "Tell them I'll pick up some new train books this week. And Helen, thank you for everything you've done for them, for me, for keeping this family together when it could have fallen apart completely. Those children need their grandfather," she said, "and you need them too." She was right. In trying to destroy me, Leonard and Sarah had inadvertently given me something precious. A chance to help shape the next generation of our family, to ensure that Emma and James grew up with different values, different choices, different legacies. That night, I went upstairs to Margaret's old craft room and pulled out the scrapbooks she'd been making for the grandchildren before she died. Photos of their first steps, first words, first birthdays. I'd stopped looking at these books after her death because they reminded me too much of what we'd lost. Now I saw them differently. Margaret had been preserving memories, creating a foundation of love that Emma and James could build on, regardless of what their parents had done. She'd been creating a legacy that couldn't be stolen or destroyed. I spent the rest of the evening working on those scrapbooks, adding new photos and stories, creating a record not just of where Emma and James had come from, but of where they were going. A record of the family they really belonged to, the values they could choose to embrace, the love that would always be waiting for them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows of the old house, but inside everything was warm and quiet and safe. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like I was truly home. Leonard and Sarah had tried to take everything from me. My life, my money, my legacy, my peace. They'd failed on every count. My life was my own again. My money was funding investigations that would save other families from what we'd been through. My legacy was being rebuilt through Emma and James, who would grow up knowing that love was stronger than greed, that family meant protection rather than exploitation. And my peace? My peace came from knowing that sometimes, when evil people underestimate their victims, justice finds a way to prevail. I closed the scrapbook and turned off the lights, ready for sleep that would come easily for the first time in months. Tomorrow, I would continue the work of the foundation. Tomorrow, I would buy new train books for James and help Emma with her school project about family trees. Tomorrow, I would continue building the legacy that Leonard and Sarah had tried to destroy, one that would last long beyond any of us and protect vulnerable people for generations to come. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a home that had weathered many storms and survived them all. Margaret's presence seemed to fill the rooms, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living influence that would guide our family forward. Leonard had been wrong about one thing in his calculations. He'd thought my death would be the end of our story, the final chapter in a tale of greed triumphant over love. Instead, it had been just the beginning of a much larger story about justice, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of real family. A story that Emma and James would help write as they grew into the people they chose to become, and that was a legacy worth fighting for.